Good afternoon and welcome. This is actually the fourth, not annual, but fourth occasional media panel that we've had here as part of the Brown Bag Lunch series. My name is Martin Langeveld, and I organized all of those. They've kind of been growing in size. I believe the first one was me and one attendee having a nice conversation over there. And then we had two that had about 4 or 5 panelists. The last one was September 2015 here, so it's been about 2 years. And we've got a bigger crew up here, so we're sort of making this a round table format. This is half the table. You all are the other half of the table, and we'll include your questions, your comments, and so forth as we go along. Do you want to be up here, or are you reporting?
I'll be up there, but I will.
Yeah. Come on, Kevin. All right, so we just got another crew member. This is good. So let me introduce the group, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who is our moderator. So I'm Martin Langeveld. My capacity here right now is as a board member of New England Newspapers, Inc., which publishes the Reformer and some other papers. I was formerly the publisher of the Reformer, and also publisher at some papers, the group's papers in the Berkshires. So we have here Kevin O'Connor, who is, I believe, freelance reporter, but a lot of his material runs in the Reformer as well as in the Rutland Herald. Roland.
Can I correct that? I don't work for the Rutland Herald.
Oh, not anymore.
The Reformer, the Commons, and Vermont Digger.
Okay, sorry about that. Roland Boyden is the production manager at Brattleboro Community Television, and incidentally, BCTV is recording this, and we'll have this on their channel and streaming soon. Olga Peters is the host of Green Mountain Mornings on WKVT, but she's probably got the most local media experience here locally, formerly the Commons, formerly WTSA, now WKVT. Randy Holhut is news editor of the Commons. Greg Sukiennik is New England Newspapers managing editor for Vermont. He's based in Manchester, but he oversees the Reformer, the Bennington Banner, and the Manchester Journal, which is a weekly. Kevin Moran is the executive editor of New England Newspapers, Inc., and Chris Lenois, who is associate director of marketing communications at Landmark College and formerly host at Green Mountain Mornings on KVT, which Olga is now hosting. And I want to make a special welcome to the St. Michael's School Journalism Club, which is sitting in the back row there, trying to figure out if this is really what they want to do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris, our moderator.
Thank you, Martin, and great to be here. Great to have everybody here on this chilly November afternoon. And I also did want to mention that we did invite people from all the media outlets in town to participate. We mentioned Tim, WTSA. We also invited people from Brattleboro, wanting to try and represent the entire media, and with regrets, some people were unable to attend. I'm glad Kevin is here to somewhat represent VT Digger, because that's another entity that we definitely want to have involved here as we talk about the state of local media here in our community in 2017. And kind of a way we'll just go about these questions is, just through eye contact, people being able to chime in at different times. And if you have questions from the audience, raising your hand, and when there's a time, I'll acknowledge you. But I want to just try and keep it as organic and free-flowing as possible. But I do want to start with a jump ball kind of question, give everybody up here on the panel about 60 to 90 seconds or so to just kind of give us their assessment of the state of the media right now, and we're looking at, again, this kind of local media landscape and how you see some of the challenges that we're facing here in 2017 and how your particular outlet is trying to meet those. Since you're right to my immediate right, Kevin, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thanks, Martin, for putting this on once again, and it's great to be on this great, awesome panel. I think in terms of my landscape, the conversation certainly is different today than it was prior to May 1st, 2016. Since then, the Reformer, along with its sister newspapers, are under local ownership and no longer corporately owned. So it's a very different environment. It's one that we're in a state of sort of rebuilding. We spent probably from May 1st to December 31st of last year, roughly 8 months, replugging in everything that had been unplugged locally from the corporate mothership. And that is an immense amount of work, everything from rebuilding circulation departments to customer services to HR to, you can't imagine, I can't understate it how much media news and being involved with media news and digital first media had literally sort of taken up, I guess, in terms of not some just the sort of the nuts and bolts of a business operation. So while that doesn't speak to it's been a lot of work in that, I guess, and so therefore sort of the landscape has changed here, and there's a new dynamic, at least with the Brattleboro Reformer going on in the Journal and the Banner and the Eagle down in Pittsfield, Mass. So for me, it's been a different conversation. I'm not complaining. I want to make that very clear. It's because it's been awesome.
Cool. Thank you. Greg?
Hi. Well, I'm still the new kid in town, as I joined the company in October of last year as editor of the Journal, and then my responsibilities grew to this Vermont managing editor role, where I'm sort of overseeing the Journal and the Banner and the Reformer. So still very much in a learning process about what makes this community tick and what the issues, what the stories really are. You've got a small but dedicated newsroom in here in Brattleboro, doing the very best they can. We're in the process of trying to unsqueeze that which had been squeezed over the years. That doesn't happen immediately, but we're doing our level best to make that work. We've got some good young reporters, a very solid photographer, some experienced editors. We're doing the best we can, and in the meantime, I'm still sort of getting on board and learning more about what makes this community click. I've more or less been over in the western end of this part of the state, so my familiarity isn't as much, but I'm working to correct that. I'm excited about where we're headed. I think we've it was about a year ago that we rolled out the redesign of the newspaper, and actually did what a lot of companies, the opposite of what a lot of companies are doing. Most of them were squeezing it down to sort of the newspaper junior paper size. We actually expanded it, made it higher quality paper. And something small like that made a difference right away, because it gave us the ability to actually put out a better looking paper. And what we're hoping is, to continue to build back to the more comprehensive coverage that you expect and deserve.
Thank you, Greg.
That's what I got so far.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Randy?
Well, I'm the ghost who walks here at the table. I was at the Reformer before it was sold to Media News Group in 1995. I was at the Reformer on my second tour from 2004 to 2010 after the consolidation had taken place. I've seen the paper when it was fat and sassy. I've seen it when it was lean and threadbare. I'm happy to see the Reformer starting to come back, because the community needs a good daily newspaper. But the concern over what was happening at the Reformer back in the early part of this decade, or the last decade, I should say, was why the Commons was founded. We're still kind of unique in this in the news world, because we're a nonprofit. We're not owned by anybody. We operate on the public radio model of we give you the news. If you like it, you give us money. We do have advertisers. They take care of about two-thirds of our expenses, but donors make up the rest of it. And community support is crucial, and being plugged into the community is how we build that trust and keep the support that keeps the newspaper going. It hasn't been easy. We've had many near-death experiences over the years, but we're doing okay. We could be doing a lot better, but like every nonprofit, and there are a lot of nonprofits in Brattleboro, as you'll find out. Like every nonprofit in Brattleboro, we have our aches and pains, and we try our best to do what we can with little to no resources and a lot of determination and a lot of support from the community.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, I'm Olga Peters. As they mentioned, I'm the new host of Green Mountain Mornings, and by new, I mean like 5 weeks new. You will still hear me pause on the air sometimes, and it's me going, now which button am I pushing now? But it is a lot of fun. I am very, very lucky in my career. I have been in journalism since 2009. I fell into it completely by accident, which is a sob story I will save for another day. But I ended up at the Commons, having never worked in journalism. So I was in print journalism for 8 years,
Yes.
give or take? And then I had worked in the film industry before that. Then I was lucky enough to be able to transfer to radio and spend some time as news director at WTSA before moving to WKVT. So I consider myself quite blessed because I feel like my career is growing. But one of the things I think that has allowed that is that we live in a community that's very dedicated to local news. There's a lot of communities that could care less, but we live in one that really, really wants its local news. And I think that's one reason, while our media may not be thriving in this area, as far as the reporters could use a little more care and feeding, like vacation days and 401ks and stuff like that. Although WKVT takes good care of me, I will say that. I would say we're not totally thriving. I would say that this is a really robust community for local news, and we're all very fortunate with that.
Thank you. Roland?
I'm Roland Boyden. I've been working at the local PEG Access TV station, Channel 8 and 10, BCTV for the last 10 years. And for the last 6 years, I've been producing some version of a news show for BCTV. And it's given me a chance to kind of observe just how many partnerships there are going on between the different news outlets here. And I think that's partly a reflection of how lean everybody's resources are, and that's sort of put a lot of the outlets in a position of having to rely on each other, but it's also been very cool, and it's been really beneficial for BCTV. So, for instance, our news show now, we go to WKVT and we film Olga twice a week talking with reporters from the Reformer and the Commons and Vermont Digger. So there's a lot of local media represented right in that partnership, and then we rebroadcast those interviews. So it's been interesting to see. It's the days of just being a newspaper where you don't do any video, and then there's somebody else that just does video, and are kind of gone. There's just the need for local news in all its forms in every way we can get it. So.
Martin Langeveld. I was a publisher of the Reformer until 2008, which is when I left. That's kind of when the whole business started to shrink, and I kind of got used to saying, introducing myself as a former publisher, formerly in the newspaper business, and saying that's a good business to be out of. And then, actually, not long after the last one of these panels in the fall of 2015, I was approached by a group of investors who are based down in the Berkshires, and they said, we want to buy the Berkshire Eagle. And wonder if you would help us out, with working on this transaction. And my first reaction was, why would you want to do that? I could think of a whole lot of better investments to make, and even probably in the media business. And so So the first thing I did really, literally, was to try to talk them out of it. And, you know, they persisted, and they kind of convinced me that actually they had some pretty good ideas, and that they were serious, and that they were not going to be the kind of owners that these newspapers had. One of the first things they looked at is they said, well, they were told by the previous owners, yeah, you can buy the Berkshire Eagle, but you have to take the Brattleboro Reformer, the Bennington Banner, the Manchester Journal along with it. And they thought, well, okay, maybe we have to do that, but we'll sell them off or something. And then the more they looked at these papers and at Southern Vermont, which they weren't all that familiar with, they liked what they saw, and they decided to keep this group intact, which had been, you know, a locally owned group of newspapers, I think since the 60s is when the Reformer and the Banner were purchased by the then owners of the Eagle. So this has been a tight, well-knit group of papers. So in any case, they went through with the purchase, and basically they have a very simple business plan, which says we will make these papers the best possible papers that they can be, as best possible community newspapers. That will bring more readers, and if we can have more readers, we can sell more advertising, and that's kind of what balances the business. So I want to welcome Jeff Potter, who's here after all.
I am here after all.
That's great.
Sorry.
Okay, editor and chief everything at
Chief whatever.
the Commons. And we're all kind of introducing ourselves here that in this first round, and then Chris is going to start peppering us with other questions. But I wasn't quite finished, and so the net result of that has been that within the last month, this group of papers received several awards at the New England Newspaper Association in Boston, including the Berkshire Eagle, the best daily and the best Sunday newspapers in their circulation group. Several awards for individual pieces of reporting that were done, including one at the Reformer, and the best magazine, which is Upcountry Magazine, that comes with your paper now, and is also distributed around town, and pretty soon will be actually monthly. So so the first leg of that business plan has moved along quite well. We're being recognized as really good local newspapers, but we're going to keep going in that direction. So,
Thanks, Martin. Jeff, just to bring you up to speed, I had asked everybody to give us their kind of 60 to 90 second synopsis of the state of local media here. I'll skip over you so you can collect your thoughts for a minute, and we'll get them from Kevin, and then we'll come back, even though we went down the table that way. All right? So, Kevin, do you want to address that, please?
Sure. I was born and raised in Brattleboro. I went and worked for about 25 years at the Rutland Herald, and then the Rutland Herald hit a financial iceberg. So I am back in Brattleboro. So part of the story, I think, is for those of us on this side of the table in terms of how do we navigate the new landscape. But part of it, as someone who lives in Brattleboro, was born in Brattleboro, and is part of activities in Brattleboro, is how, as a reader, how is someone who is part of the community interacting with us. I happened to organize the Brattleboro 4th of July parade, and which don't ever volunteer to do, by the way. But the challenge when you're someone who's trying to get news out of it's going to take place at 10 and we need volunteers and da-da-da-da is how do you navigate the current landscape? What are the resources that are available to you? What's the reality in terms of if you were to call an organization, what they can do for you? And likewise, what do you need to do for yourself? And so I think part of our role here is not only to attempt to really cover the news in the community, but also to help the community help cover itself. there are certain things that I think we can do at this table to help, but there are also certain limitations in terms of there are just only so many of us and only so many hours. So I think part of our role as well is recognizing what we can do and then sort of empowering members of the community to help us, whether that's writing press releases or informing people of other social media platforms that we have. I think part of the challenge of this is we're trying to figure out our roles within our organizations, but we're also trying to figure out how to best empower those of you who are in the community or readers to be able to help us help you as well.
Great, thanks, Kevin. You ready, Jeff?
Well, I guess as ready as I'm going to be. My name is Jeff Potter, and about 10 years ago, almost to the day, I got a call at the newspaper I was working for at the time in Shelburne Falls from a plucky upstart nonprofit newspaper and media group in Brattleboro wanting an editor. And I thought, that sounds like fun. So I thought it would be fun, and I guess I'm still here. The state of the word navigate has been used a lot right now, and I think that is probably the key word in all of this. Is the media is trying to navigate as best it can and try to figure out what our next strategies are, working together and working, and as individual entities. And that has been really tough and will probably remain tough. But I think trying to, the quest to figure that out is really what is first at the top of our minds right now, top of my mind anyway.
Great, thank you. I think one thing that maybe people have picked up on here amongst the group of people here, and myself included in this, is some of the overlap that we've all had with each other's publications and media outlets. I myself, back in high school, was a stringer for the Brattleboro Reformer. I probably actually was employed by the Reformer before anybody else at this table, just because of that relationship back in the 1980s. And that's part of the local media landscape, and the fact that we have a daily newspaper, a weekly newspaper, 2 commercial radio stations. I shouldn't neglect WVEW either, which does some local radio news coverage, and other outlets, Brattleboro, VT Digger. And so I think that the local area is well covered, but something that Randy said there about how the community needs a good daily newspaper struck me with a comment back when I was working at Mount Snow, and the new owners, Tim Boyd, said to me when we were talking about all the Vermont ski areas kind of breaking up. They were all owned by one company at one point, and they were all breaking up. And he said, even though that was the case, he looked at the ski industry as in competition with other forms of recreation and leisure. He didn't necessarily look at Killington or another ski area as the competition so much as other forms of winter recreation. And we're all here in this landscape. I think we all fit a niche here, and I kind of want to tease that out with people's impressions of this competition versus collaboration. I mean, Kevin, your byline is in all the outlets here, and obviously we all sort of fit a different niche. I guess I still say we because I'm so early removed from KVT, but also being on this side, being in the communications department of Landmark College, we're also partners with the media. So just impressions on those lines between competition and collaboration. I don't know if anybody up here has any thoughts on that and how we all sort of fit in a niche within the media landscape. Anybody want to start that off, Olga?
I'll jump on that because it's so funny you bring that up. 2 things as I'm navigating my new role. One thing I've come to appreciate is how I'm having new relationships with old partners. So, like, I've worked with BCTV before, but it's a new relationship now because they're coming to film me 2 days a week, that kind of thing. Of course, I used to work for the Commons, but again, new relationship now because I am now interviewing their reporters and not a reporter there myself. So there's that aspect. And I would say, as far as competition versus collaboration, I've always come from the side of collaboration. I don't think there's enough of us to fight. For one thing, I think we need each other too badly. But I also have a new appreciation for that. I interview someone twice a week for my radio show named Michael Lesker, who's an old print journalist from the Baltimore Sun. He now works for an organization called Talk Media News. So we're both new to radio. And he said something really interesting the other day. He said, we need all forms of media because people take information in differently, and each type of media gives information differently. And so, like, the value of print journalism is you can sit there with the information and really ponder it and take it in and go back and review things. Where with radio, you get to hear people's voices right away. You get to hear if they're upset or happy or sad or something like that. There's that human element. And then, of course, with the visual, it's the whole package. And each gives and receives information differently. And in a democracy where information is so important for us to make our decisions, the better we can absorb it and vet it and receive it, the stronger, I believe, our democracy is.
Yeah. Greg, you want to pick up on that?
Sure. I was actually, this past week, I was at a seminar put on by the New England First Amendment Coalition. It was an investigative reporting seminar, so it was reporters and editors from all 6 New England states. And the discussion about collaboration versus competition came up a lot. I mean, there were reporters from Greater Boston and from Providence and Worcester who, they very much are still in the mindset of, we got to get this first, and because they see the Globe and the Herald and each other as competition. And I think naturally we all still have that little competitive, we all get that little competitive rush out of trying to get something first and get it right, in reverse order. But at the same time, there's a fair amount of discussion about collaboration as well. One of the speakers was the former executive editor of the Associated Press, who actually, as it turns out, lives in Rochester, Vermont. And she was talking about what she thought was the need for more collaboration in this state. And just I was there with 5 or 6 other folks from Vermont, some from Chittenden County, some from mid-state, and then there was me. And I didn't sense there was any hostility about the way that we approach this in Vermont. About I just think that there's something in our. I think we understand that there are fewer of us, and that we can help each other in ways that complement each other, and maybe we still. I hope that's not my phone. There are still ways that we still want to try to be first on a story or try to get something special that nobody else did, just because we're humans and we're a little competitive that way. But I see tremendous benefit in working together. We've been working together with, we've started as a partnership with the public access television station in Manchester, where I spent most of my time so far in the state. It takes a little time to get those kinds of partnerships going. You have to sort of establish them and establish what the ground rules are, and are we going to give them everything? How much access? How does cooperation work? What does it look like? I think there's that initial those initial roadblocks to actually making it happen, in opposed to just having a great idea. Hey, let's work together. But I do see tremendous benefit in it. I think there's too few of us now to dismiss it as some sort of Pollyannish idea. I think it really is almost a necessity. It'll only grow as a necessity as we're depending on what happens with us and whether we truncate more as an industry.
The challenge with all of this, though, is I agree there's more collaboration amongst the news level, but the competition exists in terms of how do we pay for it. Mm-hmm. And Brattleboro has a certain amount of money, and there is 2 newspapers, at least 2, if not more, radio stations. Vermont Digger does a fall and spring fund drive. Vermont Public Radio does a fall and spring fund drive. And there's only so much money within Brattleboro-Windham County. That also extends, it's not just us that's asking for money. It's all the nonprofits, it's all the school groups, it's all the civic groups. So I think one of the challenges we face is the same challenge that a lot of other groups face, which is there's an amount of money in this town and in this county, and how can we all divvy it out? Can we all sort of survive based on what that is? Unfortunately, nobody comes out with a report that says, here's the amount and we all get to choose how to slice it up. We're all trying to figure that one out right now. But I think that is the one challenge going forward is I think we can collaborate more. But I think one of the questions, and I don't think any of us have the answer to, is what can this community sustain in terms of not only media resources, but other resources? How much does the community value the media resources versus the other things that it's being asked to pay for? And so I think that's one of the challenges we face at this table.
We had a gentleman in the audience who wanted to comment on this.
Perfect, because it fits right in with what I wanted to ask. At every publication, there seems to be a dynamic tension between business and journalism and editorial. For a while, it seemed to me that the Reformer had gone so much over to the other side that journalism was starting to be treated like an inconvenience to the advertiser, like the paper was all about the business. Now I'm really glad to see that the media is emphasizing journalism again. That's very healthy. But my question is about print advertising. I'm in the real estate business. We used to see a whole section full of real estate ads. Now, most people who want to do business, buyers and sellers, go straight to the internet. So what generally is happening with print advertising, not just real estate, but in general? Are you going to be able to sustain yourselves?
Well,
Or Martin, you want to?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, and anybody else, but speaking for the newspaper business, for the last 10 years or so, there's been a shift to where it used to be that maybe 1/4 of the newspaper's revenue came from readers in the form of subscription payments and single copy purchases. That shifted to being about 1/3, and now it is moving in the direction of being 1/2. Basically, not that readers are paying more, but that advertisers are paying less because there's less of it. Classified kind of ads kind of disappeared and so forth. And this is continuing to happen because of the shift to online retail. Sears just closed their store down in the Berkshires, or announced that it's closing. So there goes another advertiser out of the budget. And the problem with asking readers to pay more is that there's also been kind of a demographic shift in the readership where the younger you are, the more likely you are to be reading the news online and not subscribing to a printed paper. And reading it online so far has been mostly, I don't have to pay for that, it's free. Interestingly, over the last year, and partly because of our current political situation, major news outlets like the New York Times have seen an enormous surge in paying subscribers, including younger people, and I'm talking about people, let's say, 45 and younger, deciding that, this is worth it to me. It's worth it to me to have, a good impartial source of information, and I'm willing to pay for it. The trick now, I think, for local smaller newspapers is to figure out how does that translate to the local level, because it hasn't really happened yet.
The translation is if you give people something they want to read that is essential to their lives, that speaks to them, that covers the things that they want, they'll be there. I look at 7 Days and see how fat that paper is on any given week with advertising, how much their help wanted section's fat with ads, that now it's gotten to, if you're someone looking for a high-level position, you got to advertise in 7 days if you want to get good candidates. And yeah, you can use the excuse, it's Chittenden County, where all the money is, where all the young people are, and why 7 Days is probably the last successful alternative weekly in America. But they've hit upon a pretty good sweet spot of good journalism, good customer service, speaking to their readers, knowing what they're about, reflecting their community. That's how you get the advertising, because the advertisers will want to be where the people are. I remember a conference in Boston a couple of years ago where someone said, print isn't dead. Crappy print is dead. If your product is crappy and perceived by the readers as being crappy, they will disappear.
Well, I think that speaks to the sort of the self-fulfilling loop. And local media, I think, a lot of times is held as other to businesses out there. And local media, whether you are for-profit or nonprofit, you are an organization, you are a business in the community. And as much as you should be shopping local, I mean, to me, buying local to me means having a subscription to the Reformer, being a member of the Commons, giving to VT Digger and BCTV, and I'll figure out something to do with KVT. But that matters. We are part of that business landscape as well as reporting on that landscape.
But that's the key to making everything work, being relevant to people's lives and telling the stories that they want told. And that's what keeps every media outlet healthy.
But I want to keep this real for a second, because we're not Chittenden County and we're all eking by right now.
We are eking by.
And so one could say, oh, well, you could argue it's Chittenden County and they've got, but the fact is it is Chittenden County and they have a fourth of the population and they have a much different economic situation than we do down here. And I think one of our challenges is we don't have the number of people and the economy that can sustain a 7 days. And so and I don't have the answer to this, but what can this landscape sustain? But it also means us communicating to the public, we really need you. If you support us, we can support you, but if you don't, the situation is such that we can't. A plug, Vermont Digger is actually bringing in a woman named Stacy Mitchell. She's with the Institute of Local Economies. She's doing a study about Amazon. She feels that Vermont, when it's a Walmart or a Target, gets all up in arms and we don't want big box stores, but we're not aware of the level that Amazon is coming into our state and our communities and taking away dollars from all retailers, and that we need to start looking at that and start individually making choices in terms of, do I need to buy that online? Or if I buy that online, can I buy that through a place that actually supports a local business? For example, I didn't realize until talking to Stacy, if you don't want to necessarily go to Brown & Roberts, but you go to the Ace Hardware website and log in that you're from Brattleboro, Brown & Roberts will get a portion of that because they're the local. It's having that kind of knowledge. So I think part of this responsibility we have is to communicating to the public that we really do need your support, because without your support, we're not able to function. And it's not just what we're doing here, but it's the entire economy, local economy, that employs everybody. And I think that's the other piece of it, is trying to get it. It's not just about your newspaper, it's about your entire community. It's about everybody in it, and the fact that we're all so intertwined with each other.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
I agree with everything that has been said so far, too. I will also worry about that in this day and age, too, especially the last, 5 to 7 years, we're also competing not only for, to try to get some revenues in the door, but we're also competing for readers' time. 7 years ago, Facebook probably wasn't a big thing necessarily for most people in this room, but now you probably spend, I bet, at least an hour. I would think that you'd be rare then, but a lot of people spend hours on that. And if they're spending hours with Facebook, they're not spending it with the Reformer or iBrattleboro or the Commas necessarily. And that we could, and that's good, and that's what we want you to do. But I think maybe that's becoming the exception versus the norm. And that's what I worry about too. So it's time too, I think.
Yeah. Bethany. And then you, sir.
I'm hearing a lot of, the unsqueezing of the juice and the leanness and the sharing of resources in an economy that can't support, a million nonprofits. So my question is, I worry about the morale of the journalism staff, and how do you work with that in a time when, papers are losing funding? How do you deal with journalism morale, and how does that affect the story?
Jeff, you're sitting.
We're in total denial and spend all our time on Facebook.
I've been doing this for money since 1980. I've been through firings, layoffs, sales, consolidations. I've had it good, I've had it bad. I still want to do this because it's important. And that's why we do it here, because it is important.
Yeah, I think a lot of people up here obviously, want to have a good livelihood, but it's the profession itself.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to make money, like him being in PR, or other jobs. But the people who are in journalism, and Kevin will speak to that too, because the stars are still kind of in your eyes, and about that this isn't just a regular job. This isn't the punch in 9 to 5 job. This is something that has value to the community and means something to the community and can change the community at certain times.
Greg, you wanted to say something?
Oh, well,
okay, well, Kevin too? Okay.
Well, I would say that since we've been under local ownership, it took us a few months to get over, and I don't mean for this to say it the wrong way, but sort of to get out from under the stress of when's the next shoe going to drop. It took me personally months to get mentally past that and realize, oh my gosh, we've got an ownership group who's doing some reinvestments here and growing. So the morale at our group of newspapers is pretty darn good right now, because we have been given the mission of becoming the best local newspaper group in the country. And it's been a lot of work, but man, it's been a lot of fun. And we're making some, pretty good strides and investments. I mean, when you walk home, our newspaper group came home from the NENPA conference with 3 public occurrences awards, and there are only 19 given out across New England for last year. And to have 3 of them, regardless of like how big or how small your newspaper is, to get 3 of them, nobody else did that as a newspaper group. So we're in a good, we're walking around with some smiles on our faces for the, right now, more so than 2 years ago.
I'll jump in somewhere in between that. One of those public occurrences, by the way, was won by the Reformer, by Chris Ratter, our photographer. Did excellent work. I won't tell you what I was doing in 1980. But it's funny. You tell, people have been through this period, and then suddenly there's a reinvestment, and it's like, okay, we've been treading water this long, and now we're, guess what? Now we need to work harder. Because now we need to do the best work of our life to try to
smarter, not harder.
work smarter. Well, it winds up, I'm not smart enough to work smarter. But I'll tell you this: there is something real to being in a community and knowing that your work has value and knowing that your work is important to the community around you. I mean, I worked at national outlets before I got here. My 2 stops before this were the Associated Press and ESPN.com, and nowhere in those situations, I mean, there were big stories, and I had fun chasing those big stories. But at the same time, you never get the satisfaction of going to a church basement, and taking pictures for a Shrove Tuesday dinner, and having people hug you because you're there, because you're taking pictures of in their church basement. By the way, the shrimp gumbo was excellent. So there's that too. I mean, you go. You're taking a photo, you're waiting for the snowboard team to come home after winning the state championship, and one of the athletes gets off the bus, sees you, and says, I told you they'd be there. That's a great feeling to say, you know what, people have come to rely upon us and see us as part of the community. And I mean, even though, the financial outlook for this industry has not been rosy for a while, and not getting rosier, but at the same time, there is a tremendous amount of personal satisfaction of doing this job and doing this job well. And sometimes it has its own, sort of makes its own sauce, if you will. That the satisfaction in a job well done does, and the charge out of getting a story and getting it right does make up for a lot of other stuff that you put up with to do this job and do it well.
I have to say, though, because I feel like as journalists, we need to be really honest. This is really hard. This is really hard. And yeah, we get moments of satisfaction, but we've been through this now for at least a decade. There isn't a day I wake up that wonder what is going to change about any of this, but I'm feeling like what we're feeling in the news business in terms of what's going to change. Yes, we think we figured about how to make this work now, but it's like we're surfing and you just never know what the new wave is going to be. The only thing I have found that really gets me through it is recognizing that sometimes we get into our own thing in terms of our business, and I look at other businesses and I realize everybody's going through change. If you work for a nonprofit, you don't know what the new funding sources are going to be in terms of the government or private foundations. If you work for a business, you don't understand how online is going to affect you. I mean, everybody who works now has something going on in terms of their business that's changing. And it's just at a pace that I think none of us are used to. So I think what we're feeling up here is probably what everybody else is feeling, whether you work at a bank and you might be merging with a larger group, or whether you work for a nonprofit and you're not quite sure what Congress is going to do in terms of funding next year. So I think that's the big challenge we all face. And so I think we need to acknowledge that it's there, but I think sometimes too, in a crazy way, the fact that we feel that makes you then sometimes look out and recognizing, okay, we're part of a larger wave that's going on here, and how do maybe we talk about this in a larger context versus not just the media, but in terms of our community in general.
Martin, I know that's something you want to say on this, and then I want to get to your comments, sir. And then I'll think you
Yeah, so I totally agree with that, and I think part of the strength that's sitting around this table is that, we are all pretty much local organizations now, and if you want some control, if you want to be able to do something, it's better to be part of a local organization than some group that owns 90 newspapers across the country. And just to illustrate what that looks like, if you sort of step back to that context of the national group, which the Reformer was part of. 20 years ago, if you wanted to buy a newspaper that earned a profit of $1 million, okay, that would cost you 10 to 15 times that profit line, or cash flow line, really. So it would cost you $10 or $15 million to buy a $1 million netting newspaper. Today, you can buy that newspaper for $3 to $5 million. Okay, which means that your return is pretty good. That's a great investment, right? Except that the $1 million bottom line keeps shrinking, because the top line keeps shrinking, the revenue keeps shrinking, the subscription base keeps shrinking. So what you're really doing, and what these companies are really doing, is investing in properties that, if they're lucky, they will run for another 5 or 10 years, and they will get that $1 million, and then 900, and then 800, and they'll just milk it dry all the way down. And to prop that bottom line up, yeah, reporters have to go, pressmen have to go, whatever it is that has to go, it has to go, because we got to support that bottom line. And that's just, it is no longer a model for long-term sustainable success. So some communities, ours included here, have been lucky enough to have changes of ownership to generally well-heeled, wealthy individuals who say, I don't care about that bottom line so much. I'd like to make money, but I want a sustainable business. And that mentality really has to be in every business, again, whether it's the bank or the hardware store or whatever.
I just kind of going back to, this is mostly for print, but you had said that the Times and the Post, their subscriptions have gone through the skyrocketed. And I'm one of those guys. Back in December, I was like, if I want good journalism, I got to start paying for it. And I also kind of thought that too later on about local. And I'm thinking, why couldn't this kind of be replicated at the local level if you want good journalism? And for lack of a better example, but like BT Digger, they've been covering this story for like the last year, the chicanery going on up in Coventry. Are you all aware of that? Okay, and like reading that was one of those things like I would never, ever, ever know about this if someone wasn't covering it. And I just think like, isn't there a way to tell it to the people like, if we go away, you're not going to know about someone pouring sludge into the Connecticut River. No one's going to be covering corruption on the local school board, just embezzling money. And I just think, like, isn't there a way to take that to the people and saying that, if you don't support us, it all goes away. Right. You'll be totally in the dark.
We'll be reading Springfield, Massachusetts news.
Yes.
From everything, just from the one media outlet regionally that would cover this area. Great comment. You wanted to say something?
I want to be a cheerleader for all of you. I'm not so interested sometimes to read about what goes on in Manchester or in Pittsfield, but it's really important for me to hear and read what goes on locally. In addition, I can't wait for Wednesday. I can't wait until Wednesdays. Wednesdays when the Commons comes out, and I do spend an hour. I spend more than an hour. I spend an hour, almost close to an hour, reading Vermont Digger every day. I don't read. I don't do Facebook because I don't trust that stuff. I pay for New York Times, Washington Post, ProPublica, Daily Beast. I read. I'm voracious. And I want local news. I really cherish and value and thank you very much.
Thank you for saying
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to take that comment and kind of transition, because you may have noticed at different times we're all kind of looking at messages that we're getting up here, whether it's traditional media, we are all sort of, tied to the new technology landscape and social media, things like that. And I know all the different media outlets are adjusting to that, adapting to that, and trying to meet that. And so kind of wanted to get a chance here, again, sort of a jump ball question, but have people talk about ways they're integrating that new media effectively into their mission as reporters, and maybe some obstacles for it as well, because there certainly can be when you're talking about comments or people commenting on ongoing stories and putting erroneous information out there or unsubstantiated information, how maybe that also plays into this. But anybody want to start on the issue of social media? And
I want to nominate Roland because he hasn't said much, but also because BCTV is really technologically probably the most advanced outlet here.
Yeah,
So,
So, I mean, I think some of it is just about just the mindset around it, and trying to move away from thinking about Facebook and social media as something separate from, so it's like, I don't trust Facebook, but I do trust the news, but there's a million things on Facebook, or, we're going to do our newspaper and we're competing with Facebook. But if you can get your article headlines in somebody's newsfeed on Facebook, then they're reading your newspaper, but they're doing it through Facebook. If you can, so trying to kind of reassess how all this fits together and not thinking of it in terms of one thing, but trying to just get all of the things that you're doing through the newspaper online, using Instagram, using your photos, making the photo that you have online the thing that gets somebody in there to then read the article and go through that. I mean, if you turn on network TV, you'll see they just put Twitter posts up online all the time. Like that line is blending, but rather than looking at that as a negative consequence, I think that you really have to see how just it's all sort of getting combined. And I also would sort of urge people to be wary of the idea that sort of like new social media just straight up isn't trustworthy. I mean, I think newspapers have been using their sway as propaganda since the beginning. I mean, there's, you can't trust some news, you can trust some news. You, as a reader, have a chance to sort of try and get in there and figure out what you do and you don't trust. And, as we're talking about how how you can gain readers' trust, I mean, I think that's sort of part of how you are going to get people to keep coming back if you can prove that you're trustworthy. But I think I'll stop there for now.
To go off that, the irony of this whole thing is if I can get a story of mine in the Reformer that the Reformer then puts on its Facebook page, I get 10,000 eyes. And that's 10,000 people who don't necessarily subscribe to anything, but they do subscribe to the Reformer Facebook page. So I am constantly telling people locally, go to all the media sources, see what you can get. But by God, if the Reformer does a story and they put it on its Facebook page, you have 10,000 eyes. And a lot of those eyes are people that don't subscribe to any of this other stuff. So you have to, I mean, on one hand, I'm all for supporting the media and I want everybody to sign up for it. And yet I'm also savvy enough to know that Facebook is a real player in this whole thing. And the Reformer has a Facebook page that is picked up by more than 10,000 people in this region. And it's a real resource.
But here's the conundrum with Facebook. Who's making the money off of it?
That would be Mr. Zuckerberg.
Yes. I mean, how much? The Facebook feed is a nice, cheap way to read the Reformer without having to subscribe. So who's making money?
But I think isn't part of that then trying to figure out instead of charging people for access, you're charging people for a service. And I'm not saying, I mean, I agree, people reading on Facebook aren't paying for it, but if you can convince somebody to pay for the service you're providing regardless of the access that you, I mean, I think that's part of what you have to figure out, that reading the Reformer on Facebook is part of the package that you get when you support the Reformer. Reading, that it's, so this idea of having sort of like, I'm going to get access to the news by paying for a newspaper subscription, I think that's not going to...
Well, that's a direct way of funding, because as these gentlemen will probably tell you, how much money are you getting from Facebook over the course of a year for
I don't think we don't.
You're not are getting anything from Facebook ads?
Well, no, probably not.
I mean,
not enough to talk about it. I think, Facebook is a real player for us. I mean, half of our traffic, digital traffic, comes from social media, and between 90 and 95% of that social media traffic is driven by Facebook. So it very much really is. And I mean, when people see a Reformer headline and they click through it on a Facebook link, they're transported to the site. So that's a good thing, because then the story is read, advertisers get some exposure. So we might not get sort of a nickel for that visit, but our advertisers do get the visibility there, and we are then able to go back to our advertisers and say, look, people are seeing your ads, whether or not you're paying for the service or not.
I want to be mindful of the time because we're getting close to the 1 o'clock hour, but I know that we could continue this for a little while, but I did just this whole conversation around social media and monetizing it, and I think about our community, and we have some people in our community obviously being with one of the more senior counties in one of the more senior states. Maybe the technology curve is a little bit lower here than in other parts of the country. I also know that there's a lot of people in this community who it's a point of pride that they aren't necessarily the latest adopter of the latest technologies out there. And I wonder if that is somehow detrimental to the new business models and revenue opportunities for media. Would it be better if we were more technologically savvy and more technologically adaptive here in this community for the local media?
I think Jeff's got that one.
I just don't know.
Well, it helps a little bit to be behind the curve, because it helps that there's more people here than in, let's say, Chittenden County, proportionately, that want the news in print rather than online. There's more people here that stay with their cable subscription, which, if you didn't know it, is what pays for BCTV to exist. And if you decide to cut the cord and just have streaming video in your house, you're knocking out some bucks out of BCTV's budget for that year. So it certainly helps, but the curve keeps moving, and it'll catch up with us here, and so that's why we all have to think about our future digital existence.
Yeah.
Quick
Skip
anecdote,
Greg,
I'm
Olga,
in the weekly, I know people don't care about Manchester, but I've actually had people in Manchester, tell me, could you please not put the story online till after the paper comes out, because I want to read it in the paper first. I don't think you're going to find that in any other state in the union. That being said, I think we need to be prepared for when those demographics do shift around, because inevitably they will. In terms of our ability to use the technology to our advantage, maybe we can do better this time what we tripped over and face planted on in 1995 when we decided, I'll give it away for free.
Right.
And in our paper, if we went totally online tomorrow, we'd lose almost all of our readers.
Yeah.
Because
it's not the least of which is we still have a crappy website. But honestly, it keeps falling down to the bottom of my list of priorities because I am amazed at how little reaction that I get from our webs about how bad our website is, and most of it comes from Martin.
You're responding to your consumers.
But I mean, in terms of triaging the balancing what I have to do to get the paper out, et cetera. I mean, we've been making glacial progress on it, but the fact of the matter is that right now our revenues are probably 60% from print advertising, and about the balance by far from memberships and donations. So that's I'm always hesitant to try to do something that's going to cannibalize the one thing that's working.
Yeah. So let's get Olga here to comment on it, and then I know Jim has a question.
So quickly, I'm just echoing a little bit what Roland was saying about, I think so often we look at social media as kind of the enemy, and mishandled it can be. It's a great way to spread fake news, quote unquote, and misinformation really quickly if you want to. But I look at, I'm quite grateful for social media because we use it to promote our podcast, because I work in a medium that is quite ephemeral. I play something on the radio, it goes out over the airwaves, people maybe hear it, maybe they don't. It's here and then it's gone. So I'm quite grateful to things like SoundCloud and Facebook because it allows me to reach an audience that I may not have otherwise.
Jim, you've been over there with your hand up a while back. Do you have something you want to add to this or ask a new question?
Well, just sort of two things. In thinking about sort of the business model, we know the traditional model isn't working, and it is going to continue to decline. And I think Martin's right that we're behind other communities because we're older. So hopefully we'll see some of that. We'll be able to let other people pay for some lessons that hopefully we eventually learn. But I'm wondering about sort of. It's not a mistake, I think, that the younger people at the table are not so disliking of social media, whether it's good or bad or whatever. But we're I forgot who wrote the book, The Age of Access. I don't recall how many years ago, at least 10 years ago, if not more. But the media here still has the access to the people. And one of the things that's kind of happening in the world is, as we become more tied to our computers, people actually have more desire for connecting human to human. And I wonder if that's not an opportunity for the quote-unquote media to have more events and to start doing more things as additional revenue generation models, because we kind of have to come up with new revenue generation models or it's all going to die. And I'm actually worried about the fact that, Roland's the only person probably at the table, but because the business is consolidating, there's really no room for young voices.
Yeah. Absolutely. We are getting very, very close to the end here, and so I'm going to just do one more jump ball question here, just to kind of have everybody sort of look into their crystal ball. Not too far down the road here, but let's say 5 years from now, 2022, and an ideal vision of the local media landscape from now to the year 2022 or 23, since we're getting close to the end of 2017. We'll start at that end of the table with Mr. O'Connor.
Honestly, I have no idea, because the last time we were here, the Reformer was owned by Digital First. Digital First was going through a period of hemorrhaging. It never looked like there would be local owners coming in to do that. Vermont Digger was still sort of this fringe website. I don't think we have a clue.
Yeah. All right, Jeff, prognosticate?
It's giving me a panic attack just thinking about getting the paper, tomorrow's paper out. I just can't, as the kids say, I just can't even.
Okay. How about you, Martin?
Well, I think we're going to see some of the trends continue to go. For example, the trend I mentioned that more and more of a media organization's revenue is going to come from its audience, from its readers or viewers or whatever, and less from, especially less from retail advertising. So, and then Jim mentioned events. That really is part of that reader revenue or audience revenue. It's something that New England Newspapers is doing, has had some good events, including up here at the Street Food Festival not too long ago, but some others that they've done in the Berkshires and in Bennington area. So, and there are good models for that. For example, the Texas Tribune. Oh, whoops. Thanks, guys. The Texas Tribune, which is a great statewide politics site based in Austin, Texas, does a ton of events. And events are a way of, attracting business sponsors around them and so forth. And basically, they're profitable. The New Yorker Festival is another good example. So we're looking at ways of doing that at a local level.
Roland.
I guess if I'm looking at my optimistic future, my hope, it would all just tie into the economy in general, and you'd have less crazy wealth inequality. Because I think the newspaper media business isn't in a bubble of its own. I mean, the reason that people don't have enough money to live and there aren't enough services and things isn't just because readers are on Facebook and don't want to pay for media. The money's missing. It's all at the very, very top. And so I would hope to see legislation that changes that, and as that money returns to the people at large, I think that more of that money would return to the media that's covering it as well. So that would be my
one billionaire isn't going to buy 900,000 subscriptions to the Brattleboro Reformer. Thank you, Olga.
I don't know what the media landscape's going to look like in 5 years. I do believe that one of the silver linings of the current political situation, especially in DC, is I think people are sitting up and paying attention to journalism and are recommitting to it. So I do think that journalism is coming to a rebirth. My hope is that right now I feel the industry is incomplete in the sense that there's a lot of people working very hard in it and being held to very high standards, which they should be because we are entrusted with truth after all. But the industry is incomplete in the sense that there's a lot of those hardworking people who are working like 60 hours a week and earning enough to qualify for food stamps. And that's a part of the equation that just is unsustainable. If you want a lot of reporters at these local meetings, then they need to be able to earn a living.
Randy?
And I'd follow along with Olga's remarks that in America's newspapers, there are 1/3 less reporters in the newsrooms than there were 7 years ago. That number's not going up. In fact, the industry group that's been keeping track of it stopped counting because all they've been doing is counting layoffs. It's been exceedingly difficult to get more people in newsrooms because reporters cost money, journalism costs money. And how journalism outlets, both ourselves as a nonprofit or the Reformer as a for-profit, are going to have to struggle with how do you get your staff in line with your revenues? How do you get your news report in line with what you can afford to do and what your readers demand you should do? And if you ask me what's going to happen in 5 years, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
See, isn't it great we're on the same page in our newsroom?
Greg.
Well, I'm going to take my crystal bowling ball and hope I don't leave the 7 and 10. My hopeful crystal bowling ball says that we're going to do a better job of actually not being surprised by the train. And that fits perfectly because in our business, we tend to be very, okay, what's ahead of us? What's the project for tomorrow? What's a week out? What's 2 weeks out? Maybe if we're lucky, we might do a project that goes 3 months. Wow, that's crazy talk. And we need to do a better job of planning, of actually seeing what those future trends are going to be and adjusting to them. Unfortunately, they walked out the door before I could make a point out of them, but that group of kids that just walked out, those are the people that we need to make readers and consumers of what it is we do and have them understand that what we provide is value. And yeah, there is such a thing as objective truth, and we're trying our best to provide it. And hopefully, because if we don't grow because if we're relying so much on the current generation that's still reading newspapers this way, and we're not getting the ones that are doing this, then our future is bleak indeed.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin?
I'm an optimist, and I guess that's served me well for the past 25 years. And the optimism that I see is that that we have been through some great times, some rough times. We've jumped over hurdles. We've ducked when we needed to duck, swerved when we needed to swerve. So that kind of adaptability is in our toolbox. So I think that we will continue to make those moves on the local journalism level because we know how to do that type of thing, and that's why I think we'll be here. Hopefully, not hopefully, we'll be here in 5 years having a discussion.
Yeah.
As such.
Great. Well, I want to thank all the members of this panel for
you.
taking time out of their busy day. On behalf of the panel, thank you all of you.